Hi, Michael. The question for today is, to what extent do we have to apply ahimsa and not eating meat when we still have a great taste and appetite for it that is higher than the level of consciousness about what it means to participate in animal sacrifice?
The path Bhagavan has taught us is the path of bhakti and jnana. Bhakti means love, jnana means knowledge. Knowledge means we need to use our discrimination. And bhakti and jnana are inseparable. We can't separate them. So we need to use our discrimination. If we have a great taste or appetite for eating meat, that is a vasana. That's a strong vasana we have. But we need to use our discrimination. Firstly, quite apart from the spiritual benefit of avoiding eating meat, there's the ethical issue. That is, however we may like the taste of meat or whatever, we know we can't eat meat without some animal having been killed. So animals are being killed just for us to enjoy that taste of meat, because meat is not necessary. Maybe in some circumstances, if we were Eskimos living in the Arctic in the past, before there were any supermarkets or before food could be transported around the world. Now, if you go to Arctic, where the Eskimos live, there's probably a supermarket and you can go and buy mangoes and pineapples and everything. But so the circumstances are such, we are all now in circumstances where we have a choice. None of us are in circumstances where we have no choice but to eat meat. None of us are in that circumstance. We all have the choice. Do we eat meat or do we just eat plant foods? Since we have the choice, if we choose to eat meat, we are choosing to kill animals just for us to enjoy a certain taste that we are familiar with. Ethically, there can't be any justification for that. And if we are following this spiritual path, that is, to the extent we are following this spiritual path, our mind is being purified. And if our mind is purified, to the extent that our mind is purified, to that extent, we will feel compassion for and empathy for all other sentient beings, because we won't, when the ego is strong, we feel, I am this person, I alone matter. So that people with a very strong ego will be ruthless. They will, if they want to get something, they won't mind about how much suffering it may be causing to others. So they want, even if they have to exploit people or animals, it doesn't matter. They want what they want and they're going to get it by hook or by crook. But as we progress on the spiritual path, our Vishaya vasanas are weakened, and thus ego subsides more and more. The more ego subsides, the more we are able to see ourselves in others. So if we see another person, either human being or animal, suffering, we feel pain seeing their suffering. So knowing that obviously being killed is suffering. None of us want to, just like we desire to live in this body, because we take this body to be I, animals also desire to live in their body because they take that body to be I. So, so they have as much desire for life as we have. So there is no moral justification for killing animals just for our taste. And if we've got an iota of compassion in our heart, we wouldn't agree to allow animals to die just for us to enjoy some particular taste. It's just a matter of habit. People who are accustomed to eating meat, they say, oh, I can't live without it. But if you become accustomed to eating vegetables, then you forget about the meat. Actually, you can make more tasty vegetable dishes than you can meat dishes. Most meat dishes, they use spices and condiments and this and that from plants in order to make the meat more tasty. So it's a myth that we can't free ourselves from that desire for meat. if we use our discrimination, if we understand how ethically it's unjustified, if we think about how much suffering it's causing, and if we also consider the fact that if we eat meat, meat is by nature is rajasic and tamasic, so it will be clouding our mind. That is why we see many good people who eat meat. They may like animals, they may be very fond of their pet dog or cat or whatever, but still they eat meat because their minds are clouded and they don't make that connection between what they are eating. That was actually a sentient being, a being just like them, had to be killed just for them to eat that meat. So because their mind is clouded, they don't see that eating meat is wrong. But if we give up eating meat and thereby just take more sattvic food, very quickly our mind will be clarified and will. I mean, I can say in my case, I grew up not just in a meat-eating family. I came from a certain class where hunting, shooting, fishing, all these things I did when I was young. But when fortunately for me, though that time I didn't see these things as wrong. And my father used to justify these things. He said because there are no natural predators for deer in Scotland, he said if we don't stalk the deer and cull them, their population will become too much, and there will not be enough food for them, so they'll suffer. So it's a necessary part of the cycle of life, but the deer are culled. So there were so many justifications I heard as a child, and I accepted all those things without much question. But fortunately for me, when I was young, when I was still in my teenage, when I was 19, I traveled to India. And while traveling, I was told that you have to be careful about the food wherever you go, because there are different standards of hygiene. So generally, I thought it's safer to avoid meat as far as possible. So I slowly, started cutting back on the meat. And when I came to India, I found it's very easy in India that in most cheap eating places serve only vegetarian food. You have to go to it's only certain hotels, as they call them in India, which means like a cheap restaurant. Only the military hotels serve meat. All other ones serve only vegetarian food. So without any conscious intention, I became a vegetarian, more or less, when I came to India. And after a few months of eating only vegetarian food, when I thought about it, I thought, how was I ever able to eat meat? That is, without any conscious effort on my part, I was able to see clearly, but somehow it became very clear to me how it's completely unjustified eating meat. And so I became a vegetarian without any intention. Because I became a vegetarian, then the intention followed. So if anyone still has a taste for eating meat, let them give up for a few months or whatever, and slowly, they will find meat is totally unnecessary, and they'll become clear to them that it's totally unjustified eating meat. So if we are serious about following this spiritual path, we will definitely become vegetarian. And I believe in the context of the modern world, it's also necessary to be vegan, because people say, oh, Bhagavan also drank milk. That's true. But in the ashram, the cows were indigenous cows. They were Indian breed of cows. They would produce relatively little milk. And those cows were kept in the ashram, and the cows in the ashram were kept there till the very end of their life. Nowadays in India, a lot of the cows are crossed with foreign breeds, so Jerseys and Guernseys, but in order to produce more milk. So they're not purebred Indian cows. They're cows that have been crossed with breeds that have been bred deliberately to produce unnatural quantities of milk. And many people in India keep a cow at home because for the milk. But as soon as the cow becomes older and is producing less milk, they then sell it to get another cow that will produce more milk. So who is going to buy a cow that is producing less milk? Only the middlemen who pass it on to other people who then sell them for slaughter. So, but still in Ramanashram to this day, the cows in the ashram, to the best of my knowledge, if any cow that is there for life. So even when they grow older and they're no longer producing so much milk, they still take care of them and look after them. But that's very, very rare in the modern world. 99.999% of the milk that is produced in this world is produced on an industrial scale, but involves a huge amount of cruelty. Firstly, calves are separated from the mother within a few days of birth. Often male calves are just shot at birth because they're not going to become milk producing cows. A lot of the young cows but are just kept for a few months, fed up, and even before they're fully grown, they slaughter them because the tender meat of the young cows is supposed to be superior to the tougher meat of the older cows. So the dairy industry and meat industry, in most cases, are inseparable. That is, the two go hand in hand. So from a moral point of view, drinking milk, I mean, milk and milk products, it seems to me, is morally indefensible in the modern day world. Except maybe if in exceptional circumstances like places like Ramanashram. But so I think nowadays, if we are serious about wanting to follow the spiritual path, that is, the principle of ahimsa is a moral principle. As far as possible, we should avoid. Ahimsa means harm. Sometimes ahimsa is wrongly translated as non-violence because Gandhi used to use it in that sense. But ahimsa means more than non-violence. It means non-harming. Himsa means harm. Ahimsa means not harming. So it's a simple moral principle. We should avoid as far as possible causing harm to any other sentient being. So that is why we should avoid eating meat, and for the same reason we should also avoid milk and milk products. That is my view. But in India, many people are lacto-vegetarian. They still drink milk, but I think they should, unless they are sure that their milk is produced by absolutely ahimsa means, and that the cows are taken care of and allowed to live their full life without being sold off and sent off to someone who's going to slaughter them, unless you're sure that your milk is coming from such a source, I don't think drinking milk or milk products is morally justified. And so if we want to follow the spiritual path, we need to follow the principle of ahimsa. I think that's absolutely essential, because if we are causing harm to others, that is, the very fact that we are willing to cause harm to others, or to turn a blind eye to the harm that we may be causing to others, shows that our mind, that we are still, we still got very strong selfish vasanas that are concerned only about me and mine and not about others. So it's an integral part of following a spiritual path is to be vegetarian or vegan. I think there's no, I mean, we can't compel anyone. We can't, if someone thinks they're following a spiritual path but still wants to eat meat, we're not here to compel them. But if we want to be honest with ourselves, if we think about this thing deeply, we will come to the conclusion that it's incompatible with following a spiritual path eating meat is incompatible with following a spiritual path. And also, what is the spiritual path all about? The spiritual path is about purifying the mind. That means purifying the will, weakening our Vishaya vasanas. So the liking, the taste to eat meat, the appetite to eat meat is a Vishaya vasana, but a Vishaya vasana of a very bad kind. It's what Bhagavan describes as a subha vasana. That means some vasanas are less harmful. They are subha vasanas. More harmful vasanas are asubha vasanas. So it's an asubha vasana. So we should first get rid of our asubha vasanas as much as possible. So if we cannot even give up the vasana to eat meat, how are we going to give up all the other vasanas, all the more subtle vasanas that we have? So it's integral to the part, to following a spiritual path. I mean, it's a preliminary in all forms of yoga, all spiritual practices. The first thing they say, the one moral principle that is insisted upon in all, as far as I'm aware, in all forms of yoga and all forms of spiritual practice is ahimsa. A lot of moral codes are just vary from society to society. But the only objective way of measuring what is right and what is wrong is it causing harm to others? So long as we are not causing harm to others or to ourselves, even if society says that's bad, it's not necessarily bad. But even if society justifies it, like modern day society justifies eating meat. I mean, nobody, there are no laws against eating meat or I don't know, as far as I'm aware, there's no country in the world where it's illegal to eat meat. It's legal to slaughter animals and eat them. It is socially acceptable. But just because it's legal and socially acceptable doesn't mean that it's morally right. So if we're following this spiritual path, the one moral principle that we need to follow is the principle of ahimsa. I mean, of course, we can't totally avoid causing harm, and often there are many situations where there's a moral dilemma. But if you choose one course of action, you're causing one form of harm. If you choose another, you're causing another. So which to choose? So it's not. Like in life, things aren't always black and white. But as far as eating meat is concerned, it is not necessary. So it's very obviously ahimsa. It's very obviously causing harm, and it's unnecessary. So if we really want to, if we're really serious about following the spiritual path, and the spiritual path, once we've come to Bhagavan, the spiritual path we're trying to follow is self-investigation and self-surrender. If we can't even surrender the liking to eat meat, how are we going to surrender ourselves?
Yeah, exactly. But for someone who still has a taste for meat, for example, but understands at the same time that it's causing harm to animals and so on, the industry and so on, it would be a good idea to make a conscious effort, or they can definitely trust that it's
Bhagavan has strongly recommended
of its own with practice.
Yes, Bhagavan has strongly recommended. He says of all the niyamas, that's all the restrictions, Mitta Sattvika Ahara Niyama is the best. Mitta Sattvika Ahara Niyama means moderate quantities of food. Sattvika means what is conducive to the quality of sattva, which is the quality. Sattva literally means beingness. So that is the sattvika ahara means food that is sattvika in nature. That is the food that is conducive to a calm and peaceful state of mind is sattvika ahara. So any food that is produced by causing harm to others cannot produce a sattvic state of mind. So Sattvika Ahara implies vegetarian food at the very minimum, preferably vegan food. And it also, not all, there are also some plant foods, maybe like alcoholic drinks, for example. They may be produced purely from plant sources. I mean, nowadays you can get vegan wines and everything where no animal product is used at all in the production. So you could say, oh, that's vegan, so is that sattvic? No, it's not, because we know alcohol has a certain rajasic and tamasic effect on the mind. So anything that has a rajasic and tamasic effect on the mind, which includes all foods produced by means that cause harm to any living being, those should be avoided. And so I'd explain the meaning of Metta, Sattvika, Ahara, and Niyama. So Sattvika Ahara is food that is conducive to Sattva. Ahara means what is taken in. So it's not only food, it's also drink and things. And it can also, we can even extend it to mean what we take in through our senses. So you could say, if you have a liking to watch violent movies or something, that is not Sattvika Ahara. That is, you're taking in, constantly thinking of violent things. So, but generally ahara is used in the sense of just the physical food we eat, but it can also mean the food for the senses. And niyama means a restriction. So Bhagavan says of all the niyamas, this restriction of eating only mitta sattvika ahara, that moderate quantities of sattvic food, that is the best among all. And he says if we that will help us in our practice of self-investigation. Because it will give the mind, only a sattvic mind can go deep in this practice. So long as our mind is under the sway of rajas and tamas. Rajas means the restless activity, and tamas means dullness and lack of clarity. So to practice self-investigation, we need a clear mind and we need a calm mind. So tamas and rajas will obstruct our practice of self-investigation. So everything we can do to keep our mind in a sattvic condition will help us in our practice of self-investigation. And Bhagavan says eating sattvic food is a very important, therefore eating sattvic food is a very important aid. That is what he says in the 9th paragraph of Nana.